Somewhere along the way, you started searching. You might not have realized it at first. Maybe it looked like religion. Maybe it looked like yoga, or crystals, or meditation, or books with titles like The Power of Now. Maybe it looked like quiet desperation in a therapist's office, or in the notes app of your phone at 3 a.m., typing out things you were too ashamed to say out loud. But whatever shape it took, the feeling underneath was the same. A deep, aching sense that something important had gone missing. Most people think they're searching for God, but they're not. They're researching for themselves, the version of themselves that existed before the world taught them how to be small, polite, obedient, afraid. We imagine God as something we must ascend toward, something bigger and better and far away. But maybe God, or whatever name you use for that unreachable, sacred thing, is not a mountaintop. Maybe it's a mirror. And maybe the face you're trying to see in that mirror isn't divine at all. It's you, the real you, the version that used to speak freely before you were interrupted too many times. The version that laughed too loud, loved too easily, cried without apology. The version that still lives inside you, but doesn't trust the world enough to come out. What if God is just the name we gave to the feeling of wholeness we lost? People don't wake up one day and feel spiritually empty because they've failed. They feel it because at some point in their life, they were forced to become something they're not. They traded wonder for rules, curiosity for guilt, presence for performance. They were told to grow up, to get serious, to fall in line. And slowly, without realizing it, they became disconnected from the part of themselves that used to feel safe inside their own skin. So we go looking, not just for answers, but for relief. For something, anything, that can fill the gap between who we've become and who we remember we once were. And because we're raised in a world that externalizes everything sacred, we assume that what we're missing must be somewhere outside of us. Up there, in scripture, in signs, in someone else's voice. We call it God, or the universe, or something bigger. And we tell ourselves that if we pray hard enough, meditate long enough, heal deeply enough, maybe one day we'll feel whole again. But here's the truth no one tells you. You were never meant to leave yourself in the first place. You were just trying to survive. This is the spiritual ache we carry. It's not about finding salvation. It's about finding permission. Permission to remember who you were before you were edited, before you were spiritualized into obedience, before love became transactional, before your innocence was labeled a sin. What you really searching for is a version of yourself that still knows how to feel without shame, that still believes they are worthy without needing to prove it. And yes, we can call that God, but maybe we don't need to. Maybe we're not being called to return to something divine. Maybe we're being called to return to ourselves, before the world demanded a version of us it could understand. In this story, we'll explore that longing. We'll look at how the search for God often masks a deeper search for lost identity. We'll talk about how spiritual projection is shaped by trauma, by family systems, by societal pressure. We'll talk about how people end up worshipping the very voices that silence them. And we'll ask what it means to reclaim the sacred, not in temples, not in theology, but in the quiet moment where you finally feel seen by your own soul. Because you were never meant to lose yourself this completely. And God, whatever you choose to call it, was never meant to replace you. It was meant to remind you of who you were and still are underneath it all. There's a famous idea, often quoted in sermons and stitched into spiritual texts, that we all have a God-shaped hole inside us. A space that no relationship, no success, no possession can fill. But what if that hole isn't shaped like God at all? What if it's shaped like you? Not the version of you the world applauds, but the one you had to abandon to survive it. The you that once lived without permission. The you that believed love didn't have to be earned. It's not a stretch to say that most people, as concept of God begins with their experience of love, or more specifically, their access to it. For a child, love is God. A caregiver's attention, safety, warmth, these are the first sacred truths. And when that love is consistent, unconditional, and safe, the child grows with a sense of rootedness. But when love is unpredictable, distant, or conditional, something begins to fracture. The child learns to monitor, to adapt, to shrink. And in that shrinking, the soul doesn't just go silent, it goes searching. The absence of love leaves a wound, but it also leaves a question. Who do I need to become to be accepted? That question becomes a religion of its own. Rules are formed, punishments internalized. The self becomes a performance, and God, or the idea of God, becomes the ultimate judge of that performance. Not because God is cruel, but because we've projected our earliest emotional landscape onto something infinite. This is where the God-shaped hole begins. Not in spiritual failure, but in emotional abandonment. It's not that we've lost contact with a higher power. It's that we've lost contact with ourselves. The original, intuitive, fearless self that existed before shame was taught. Before punishment was framed as love. Before disconnection was spiritualized into something holy. And so we begin the lifelong pursuit of return. But we don't always realize what we're returning to. We chase religious highs. We chase mystical experiences. We meditate, fast, pray, breathe, manifest all good and beautiful practices in their own right. But beneath them, there's often a more tender desire. We want to feel safe inside our own skin again. We want to feel held, not watched, understood, not corrected, loved, not assessed. It's worth asking, what is it we really long for when we say we want to find God? Is it forgiveness, peace, belonging, or is it something more quiet, the freedom to exist without needing to apologize for our existence? The feeling of waking up one day and no longer arguing with the voice in your head. The ability to laugh and not scan the room for permission. The permission to grieve without being told to move on, to love without being told it's too much, to feel joy without the creeping fear that it will be taken away. We often assume that spirituality is about ascending, about becoming something higher, better, purer. But maybe it's not about climbing up. Maybe it's about coming back down, to the body, to the breath, to the forgotten self, the one who knew how to feel without flinching, the one who didn't need theology to know they were whole. That's what many people are really seeking in their spiritual path. Not an external savior, not cosmic approval, but reconnection. And when they touch it, even briefly, it's unmistakable. It's not always light and peace. Sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's rage, sometimes it's realization of how much they lost, trying to be someone the world would accept. But underneath that pain is a deeper recognition. I was never the problem. I was only protecting myself. The God-shaped hole was never about religion. It was about remembrance. It was about the part of you that still remembers how it felt to be whole, and mourns the fact that you had to forget in order to be loved. And that's the great misunderstanding of spiritual longing. People assume they're failing because they can't find peace through belief systems. They feel distant from God and blame themselves. But maybe that distance isn't failure. Maybe it's feedback. Maybe it's your soul saying, you don't need to ascend to be accepted. You need to return to the version of yourself that already was. The one that laughed loudly. The one that made up songs for no reason. The one that loved without contracts. The one that didn't need to be saved, only seen. You're not searching for God. You're researching for that moment in your life when you still believed you were worthy, before the world taught you to forget. No one tells you it's happening. There's no ceremony, no moment where someone officially announces that you're about to lose yourself. It happens slowly through repetition, through correction, through silence. You begin life fully present in yourself, fully feeling, fully curious. You touch without shame. You speak without filter. You laugh, cry, scream, and trust. You don't yet know the rules. And more importantly, you don't yet know that there are rules. Then the world starts to whisper. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently. It tells you what to do with your voice. Lower it. What to do with your tears. Stop them. What to do with your truth. Reshape it. Make it easier to digest. Suddenly, you learn that there's a version of you that earns love, and another that invites rejection. You begin editing yourself to survive, not because you want to, but because you're wired to adapt. This is not weakness, it's intelligence. Children are brilliant in their ability to read emotional weather. If love is only given when they behave, they will become obedient. If praise only comes with silence, they will become quiet. If safety only exists in invisibility, they will become invisible. But the cost is heavy. Each adaptation comes with a withdrawal, a piece of the soul that goes underground. Not gone, just buried. This is how most people lose touch with their original self, not through rebellion, but through survival. The world teaches them to forget, and in that forgetting, something sacred is misplaced. The laughter becomes cautious. The body becomes a performance. Emotions are filtered. Desires are doubted. And over time, you wake up in a life that looks acceptable on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. This hollowness is often misdiagnosed as depression, anxiety, or existential dread. And while those terms can be useful, they sometimes miss the deeper truth. You are grieving someone you once were. You are homesick for a version of yourself that used to speak clearly before the world began, translating your voice into something more comfortable, more appropriate, more palatable. You don't just miss happiness, you miss belonging to yourself. And because you no longer know how to return, you project that longing outward. You look for someone or something to restore what was lost. For many, that becomes God, or the idea of God, an all-seeing, all-knowing presence who can finally validate the parts of you you were taught to suppress. A divine parent who won't flinch at your grief, who won't punish your truth, who won't make your love feel excessive. You're not looking for religion, you're looking for reintegration, a coming home. But even then, the world intervenes again. It hands you a new set of rules, this time cloaked in holiness. It tells you how to pray, how to dress, how to speak. It tells you what to feel guilty about. It replaces your inner compass with a borrowed one. And once again, you find yourself adapting. You begin to wonder if God only loves the cleaned-up version of you, the obedient one, the repentant one, the one who never doubts, never questions, never feels too much. You begin to feel that even your spirituality must be sanitized. And so, the forgetting deepens. You lose the language for your own truth. You become fluent in the language of doctrine, but mute in the language of the soul. And while you may find community, structure, tradition, all of which can be beautiful, you may also find yourself further from the person you were trying to return to in the first place. The sacred becomes something you reach for, but never touch, because it no longer lives in your body. It lives in someone else's approval. But the soul does not forget itself so easily. It sends signals, in dreams, in grief, in sudden joy that doesn't make logical sense. In the way your chest tightens when you hear a song that reminds you of a time before shame. In the way your stomach flips when you say yes to something that's a no. These moments are not random. They are fragments of memory, not of events, but of being. The memory of what it felt like to be whole. What's cruel is that the forgetting is praised. The child who quiets their voice is called well-behaved. The teen who stops asking hard questions is called respectful. The adult who conforms is called successful. But none of these labels account for the loss beneath them. None of them ask, who did you have to bury to become this version of you. And that is the real spiritual crisis. Not a lack of faith, but a lack of self. A life that no longer feels like it belongs to the person living it. And that ache, that sacred ache, is what we've mistaken for distance from God. But it's not distance. It's disconnection. Not from something higher, but from something deeper. Because what you're truly searching for isn't an external light to follow. It's the internal spark you once held without shame. The part of you that knew how to listen, not to rules, but to resonance. And when you begin to hear it again, even faintly, you don't just feel spiritual, you feel real. You feel like you. The gods we seek often reflect the wounds we carry. That's something most people never consider when they talk about their faith, their doubt, or their spiritual longing. But it's quietly true. If you grew up with love that felt conditional, you may find yourself drawn to a God who demands more than you can give. If you were constantly punished for your emotions, you may believe the divine is angered by your vulnerability. And if you were praised only when you performed, it's likely that somewhere deep down, you believe even God only loves you when you're good. This isn't a critique of belief, it's a mirror for it. Because long before we meet God in Scripture, we meet God in people. In the tone of our parents' voices, in the rules we were raised with, in the silences we were forced to sit in. That first emotional environment becomes the lens through which we perceive everything, including the sacred. And over time, what we call God often becomes a projection of the emotional patterns we've internalized. We don't just worship what we believe, we worship what we fear. This is why some people find peace in faith, and others find terror. Why some feel held, and others feel constantly watched. It's not because God changed, it's because they did, shaped by environments that made them question their worth, their instincts, their belonging. And when the divine is filtered through that much pain, it's no longer a source of comfort. It becomes another authority to please, another standard to fail. The question then becomes, are you in a relationship with the divine, or with your past? Are you praying, or are you pleading with the version of yourself that was once punished for being too much? Are you seeking truth, or seeking safety? Because the human brain is remarkable in its ability to take intangible concepts and shape them to match our internal world. We give form to the formless, and when our inner world is shaped by shame, our image of God becomes a God of shame. A deity that confirms our deepest fear, that we are not enough as we are. This process is rarely conscious. It happens subtly, slowly, and with the best of intentions. We join communities that give us belonging. We read books that give us clarity. We adopt rituals that offer structure. And yet, somewhere along the line, the divine goes from being a mirror of love to a magnifying glass of our flaws. And instead of being liberated, we become trapped, not by the sacred, but by our interpretation of it. To deconstruct that mirror is not to reject God. It's to question who handed you the frame, who taught you that holiness meant silence, who convinced you that doubt was rebellion, who told you that your desire for freedom was a spiritual weakness. Because when we peel back those teachings, we often find a very human story beneath them, one where power demanded obedience, where culture demanded conformity, where institutions demanded loyalty, and God, unknowingly or not, was made to serve those agendas. Not as a presence to encounter, but as a boundary to fear. But what if the divine was never meant to be feared? What if God, or the sacred, or the universe, or whatever you choose to call that mystery, was not a judge, but a witness? Not a ruler, but a mirror? What if your longing wasn't disobedience, but intuition? What if your questions weren't blasphemy, but your soul's way of trying to breathe again? These are not heretical thoughts. They are healing thoughts. Because the real crisis isn't losing belief, it's losing the self within belief. When you no longer recognize your own voice in your spirituality, when your prayers sound like apologies, when your rituals feel like transactions. That's when the divine stops being a companion and starts becoming a performance. And that's not the fault of God. That's the result of projection of years spent believing that your worth had to be earned, that your emotions had to be filtered, that your truth had to be translated. You're not trying to reconnect with God, you're trying to reconnect with yourself and hoping that God still lives there. And maybe that's the real invitation. Not to abandon faith, but to reclaim it from the people and systems who taught you to be afraid of your own soul. To sit in silence, not because it's what you were told to do, but because it's what your spirit needs. To ask questions, not to rebel, but to remember. To cry, rage, laugh, and feel without censorship. Because if the divine exists, surely it exists in your full expression, not your performance. And if the mirror was distorted, maybe it's time to put it down. Not to walk away from what's sacred, but to see it clearly for the first time, not outside of you, but within you. Because when you stop trying to become who you were told to be, you begin to meet the version of yourself you were always meant to remember. What if the thing you've been calling God isn't a being at all? What if it's a feeling, one you barely remember, but never stopped longing for? A moment in your life when you were fully present, unafraid, unedited, the kind of presence that doesn't need to be earned, and the kind of worth that isn't in question. What if you're not looking for a higher power, but for the last time you felt truly like yourself, before the world started chiseling you into something more acceptable? The search for God is often the search for permission. Permission to feel deeply, to break down, to ask impossible questions. Permission to trust what you feel without having to explain it. Most people don't need theological proof. They need emotional safety. They need someone, something, to tell them that they can stop pretending, that they don't have to hide, that they don't have to keep earning their right to exist. This is why so many spiritual awakenings feel less like enlightenment and more like grief. Because what you find, after all the layers are stripped away, isn't a radiant light or a booming voice from the heavens. What you find is a younger version of yourself, the one who used to laugh without apology, the one who trusted her body, the one who believed his voice mattered, the one who thought love would last forever. And standing in front of that version of you can be devastating because you realize how long it's been since you've seen them. You're not looking for a God to worship. You're looking for the part of yourself you left behind when love became conditional, the part that still dances when no one is watching, the part that feels everything too much, the part that used to ask questions without fear of being punished, the part that still remembers how to play, how to rest, how to just be without needing to prove anything. And maybe that's what the divine really is, not something beyond you, but the part of you untouched by the roles you've had to play, the part that never stopped dreaming, the part that mourned silently every time you silenced yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. That's the sacred presence you feel when the world gets quiet enough. Not a God above, but a truth within. That's why traditional religion doesn't always land for everyone, because it so often starts with the premise that you are broken, and only through belief can you be made whole. But what if you're not broken? What if you're bruised from bending too far away from yourself? What if salvation isn't something you receive, but something you remember? You're not searching for doctrine, you're searching for alignment. You want your outer life to match your inner truth. You want to speak words that your soul doesn't flinch from. You want to love in a way that doesn't require self-abandonment. You want to walk through the world knowing that you are not a performance, but a presence. That's what healing often looks like. Not changing who you are, but returning to who you were before you were told to be someone else. And this return isn't loud or dramatic. It often begins in moments so small, they could be missed. A deep breath you don't rush through. A boundary you finally hold. A song that makes you cry, and you let it. A memory that breaks you open in the best way. A decision made from inner knowing instead of external pressure. This is sacred work, not because it's mystical, but because it's real. Because it puts you back in your own body. Because it restores your name. Because it lets you sit with yourself and say, this is who I am. You don't need to become someone worthy of being found by God. You need to find the version of you who never stopped waiting to be remembered, not saved, recognized. Because what you're actually looking for isn't perfection, peace, or even power. You're looking for permission to stop performing, to stop pretending, and to finally live a life that feels like your own. And that permission, it doesn't come from the heavens. It comes from within. Letting go of the God you were taught to worship is not an act of betrayal. It's an act of bravery. Because for many, belief was never just belief. It was belonging. It was safety. It was a promise that pain would be explained, that meaning would be made, that goodness would eventually be rewarded. So when that belief begins to unravel, it doesn't just feel like a loss of faith. It feels like the floor disappearing beneath your feet. But maybe the unraveling isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of something softer, truer, something yours. When you return without a religion, what you're really returning to is your own voice. Not the one that was coached into politeness. Not the one shaped by fear of punishment. But the one that spoke before the world edited your language. The one that asked questions without shame. The one that felt joy without guilt. The one that didn't need sacred texts to feel sacred, because it hadn't yet learned to separate itself from the divine. This return doesn't require a temple. It doesn't require a name for God. It doesn't even require belief in anything supernatural. What it requires is stillness and the courage to listen to what's underneath all the noise. Because once the rules are gone, the performances are dropped, and the expectations silenced. You're left with something incredibly fragile, yourself. And the real question becomes, can you sit with that version of you? Can you love the one who didn't earn it? Can you forgive the one who hid too long? Can you rebuild a life that no longer needs to be witnessed to feel real? Because that's what most of us are seeking, not salvation, but restoration. Not worship, but wholeness. And that wholeness comes when you finally stop trying to be someone who is easy to love and start becoming someone who is true. It comes when you choose truth over comfort. When you let yourself be seen, not for what you believe, but for who you are. It comes when you realize that faith was never meant to erase you. It was meant to lead you back to you. That's why people cry during music they can't explain. That's why some people find God in forests, in paintings, in the smell of home-cooked food, in a child's laugh. Because the sacred has never belonged to institutions. It has always lived where your guard is down, where you feel most alive. You're not godless. You're not lost. You readjust remembering piece by piece who you were before you were taught to forget. You're walking back to yourself, barefoot and honest, without needing to perform holiness to be considered whole. And when you finally arrive, not to a heaven, but to a moment, it won't feel like revelation. It'll feel like something far more ordinary. Like a deep breath you didn't realize you were holding. Like the weight of pretending falling off your shoulders. Like belonging not to a group, not to a system, not to a name, but to yourself. And maybe that's the only divinity we ever needed. Not one that watches us, not one that waits to judge us, but one that simply whispers, you never had to leave.